Good evening, and welcome to the second section of the Culture of Care series, co-sponsored by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Division of Student Affairs, and the Center for Faculty Excellence. I'm Alan O'Barr. I'm the Director of Counseling and Psychological Services at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Tonight, we're going to be discussing vicarious trauma, potential burnout, and the benefits of caring for oneself during this time of great transition. In my medical training in the early 1980s, I was taught to distance myself emotionally from the suffering of my patients. The notion was that it would render me less emotional and more objective in the service of providing efficient care, unclouded by emotion. If only that had worked. 7 years of psychotherapy and multiple medications later, I realized what a toll my medical education had taken on me. Not only in witnessing the suffering of others, but also in blocking my responses to that suffering. I mean, in essence, I'd closed my heart. Now, 30 years later, it's clear to me that emotional trauma, be it direct, vicarious, or historical, may be the leading cause of psychological suffering in this country. As witnesses to this trauma, we may choose to close our hearts or numb our emotions, and the trauma will be stored in us, unprocessed. We may choose to open ourselves to the suffering of others, but we're still left with the vicarious trauma that walks hand in hand with it. Ultimately, the most sustainable choice is to process our trauma, but the speed of our culture and the expectations of it generally don't allow the time needed to do this. So the question then is, if we are unable to adequately process each trauma, direct, historical, or vicarious, how do we keep our hearts open and at the same time limit our vicarious trauma so as to stay active in the process of working for the positive during this time of cultural evolution? It's a big question. I hope that you enjoy the presentation. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Lambert-Ward, Director of the Carolina Cooperative for Resilience, and I'm honored to serve as the moderator for this second event in the Culture of Care, Racial Trauma, Healing, and Community Resilience series. This evening's event is divided into 3 segments. First, Andrea Murray-Lichtman and Tatiana Williams will begin our conversation with a focus on vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. Once their remarks conclude, we will transition to Dr. Ed Fisher and Samantha Liu, who will discuss the work of Peers for Progress and the UNC Peer Support Corps, while showcasing examples of how our community has banded together to support each other throughout the challenges of the last year. Finally, we will invite all speakers back for the Q&A portion of our event. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, I ask that you use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will periodically check this queue and we'll ask those questions out loud for all to benefit from the answer at the end of the presentations. So first up, we have Andrea Murray-Lichtman. She is a clinical assistant professor at the University of North Carolina School of Social Work. She graduated from the Academy of African-Centered Social Work in 2018 and is currently a doctoral student at Memorial University of Newfoundland. She has a combined 17 years of physical health, mental health, and substance misuse treatment experience within integrated healthcare and criminal justice settings, serving people living with comorbid mental health, substance misuse, and chronic physical health diagnoses. Andrea received the Dean's Excellence in MSW Advising Award in 2021 and 2018, and the Dean's Recognition of Teaching Excellence Award in 2015. Her research interests include racial equity and access and outcomes across social systems, and her theoretical lens includes critical race theory, critical whiteness studies, and methodology centering counter-narratives. She is currently a project manager for a substance use prevention, education, and research project and co-investigator with the Specialty Mental Health Probation Research Team and the Governor's Crime Commission's Victims of Crime Statewide Assessment Team. Andrea serves on the Council's Social Work Education Task Force for Anti-Racism, where she provides statewide, nationally, and international workshops ranging from topics of strategies to promote racial equity and strategies for holistic wellness. We also have joining us Tatiana Williams. She's also a clinical assistant professor with the UNC School of Social Work and the director of the 12-month Advanced Staining Masters of Social Work program. She is the coordinator of the school's social work licensure program. Ms. Williams received her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Wellesley College and MSW from UNC Chapel Hill. She is a licensed clinical social worker and currently serves on the North Carolina Social Work Certification and Licensure Board. In addition, she is interventionist with the Substance Use Prevention and Education Research Program. She teaches direct practice social work, field education, and school social work practice courses. Her practice areas and expertise include trauma, substance use, child and adolescent mental health, and school social work. Her research interests include African American single parent engagement and student success in schools. Please welcome Andrea Murray Lichtman and Tatiana Williams.
Hello, and Tatiana will be sharing our slides, so we'll give her 1 second. All right, thank you so much, Alan, for that introduction to our topic today, and Jessica for your coordination of the event, and all the people, Antoinette, all the people behind the scenes. We are so happy to be a part of this effort today and to be with you all. Welcome to those present in the virtual space today, and also those who will view the recording at a later time. Our hope is that your takeaway will enhance your way of being. I am Andrea Murray Lichtman, as Jessica mentioned, and my colleague wants to give a shout out right now.
Hello, I'm Tatiana Williams, and we are so pleased to join you from the School of Social Work today.
Absolutely. So we'll move to, and so as you saw, the title of our presentation is Caring for Myself is Not Self-Indulgence, Navigating Vicarious Trauma and Potential Burnout. And as you can tell from this quote by Audre Lorde, those are her words. They came exactly from her, but we realized that they resonated so much with us when we thought about having this discussion with you. Audre Lorde really helped us to think about how to ground our discussion. Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So our conversation today will focus on self-care and personal wellness in the context of all that is going on around us. Next slide. As we contextualize ourselves within the past 14 months, we realize that many of us have been called on to help others while being impacted ourselves by the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racism in America. And we recognize the toll that that takes on our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. Next slide. So our goal today, we would like for you to leave feeling that your knowledge, your self-awareness, and your action plan has been enhanced by our discussion. We hope to help you to understand terms like stress, burnout, compassion fatigue, trauma, vicarious trauma. And then we want to situate those terms within our current situation in our environment and in our world. Tatiana?
Thank you so much, Andrea. I think that before we talk about vicarious trauma, we need to understand those foundational areas of stress and those terms that build towards it. And stress, as we know, is a state of emotional or physical strain or tension, which is essentially the body's reaction to a challenge or demand. It's a common experience that can be positive to help us in avoiding danger when we think about the fight, flight, or freeze response. And then it also helps to support us with meeting deadlines or working on projects for students that are completing papers or preparing for conferences. And we also know that stress has long-term effects that we're going to talk about more this evening. According to the American Psychological Association, they completed an American survey of stress in 2019. And they found that more than 75% of adults reported the physical symptoms associated with stress, such as headaches, exhaustion, and changes in sleep patterns. 50% of these adults were experiencing some form of insomnia due to stress. And when looking at the various ways that adults were coping, you can see numbers of adults who were using some form of exercise or walking to manage stress, listening to music, connecting with friends and family. And I'd like to hone in on the fact that in that lower right-hand corner, 3 in 5 adults reported that they could have used more emotional support in the last year. And I also want to remind us that this survey was completed in 2019, which was completed prior to the height of the 2 pandemics that we are currently experiencing. Burnout is definitely a term that occurs when we progress into some of the more long-term effects of stress that we mentioned earlier. It's the chronic stress involving emotional exhaustion, a negative attitude towards the folks that you're serving, as well as a decreased commitment to the profession. The symptoms are similar to depression, anxiety, decreased work satisfaction, and has the potential as well for increased conflict. The professions that reportedly have the highest rates of burnout include physicians and nurses, social workers, teachers and principals, attorneys, as well as police officers. The American Psychological Association also defines compassion fatigue as an experience when you're taking on the weight and the load and the suffering of others who have experienced chronic stress or trauma. Burnout is definitely a component of compassion fatigue, and people who are experiencing compassion fatigue will have some of the secondary experiences of traumatic stress. They may be very anxious. They may be hypervigilant, which includes increased alertness and extreme sensitivity to the environment. They may experience intrusive thoughts of having images or experiences continue to be in their mind that causes them a lot of distress, as well as experiencing some levels of numbness. And when you're thinking about folks who are experiencing compassion fatigue, you may hear similar sayings such as, I just don't have anything left to give, or that they're feeling as if the level of empathy that they're exuding and exerting is just at an overload. Before we start to discuss vicarious trauma, I think that it's fair for us to also define trauma. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network defines trauma as an event that is frightening or dangerous, or a violent event that poses a threat to life or body integrity. Witnessing a traumatic event that threatens a life or physical security of a loved one can also be traumatic. And these experiences initiate strong emotions and physical reactions, such as terror, hopelessness and fear, and overwhelm with intense physical and emotional responses. And when we couch that and frame it in vicarious trauma, this occurs when we're continuously working with people who have experienced trauma. We are often overly involved, emotional, feeling the intensity of the anger and rage and sadness, and having the thoughts about the people that we serve and work with, and reliving that experience. Some have reported having this bystander feeling of guilt, shame, as well as self-doubt. While some compare and contrast and want to know the differences between compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue is often associated with that level of exhaustion while vicarious trauma has the nuance of involving a very intense change in worldview and a sense of justness and safety within our world. And when we think about um, the many people of color and Black and brown bodies that have been murdered, this is definitely a very current and relevant experience that many folks have had in experiencing vicarious trauma.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tatiana. So we get to the point, Tatiana has almost made the case as to why self-care or personal wellness is important, right? What we know, what's written in the literature is that it helps us to gain equilibrium between the emotions, the mind, the body, spirit, our relationships, and our work. In social work, we like to say that self-care is an essential component of competent, compassionate, and ethical practice. We like to say that it acknowledges the challenging and sometimes overwhelming nature of work, and that it enhances short and longer term health and well-being, and also helps us to manage stressful experiences. For me, as a social worker, and you heard Jessica's introduction of me with 17 years of practice, for me, the last year really brought into focus how crises and events that are happening around me can derail the best of intentions. Next slide. So that brings us into the context as we think about the aims of self-care, that we might have taken into the beginning of 2020, and then we layer it. Not to say that 2020 was the start of injustice. It definitely was not. But I think that, things became more in your face and we began to see things more. And so as we think about the aims of self-care and we layer over it systemic injustice that is in your face, it's up close and it's personal, it becomes easier to understand how one might begin to place value into basic survival, right? And other things like intentional self-care may just fall to the side. And so please don't get me wrong. Survival is very, very important. All caps here, very important. However, if we stay too long in survival mode, this activated fight or flight that Tatiana mentioned, this mental and physiological stance of being primed and ready, fearing the next thing that's going to happen, the next news event that's going to show another body that has been murdered, we began to have diminished personal, relational, and occupational efficacy. We find ourselves just surviving and not thriving. We have defined the sustained stressors for you, and we've talked about how they can impact and change your personal state of being. And now we're going to go into greater discussion about the context, because we recognize that systems and organizations play a role and send messages about the importance of self-care, and we don't want to leave that out of the discussion. Next slide, please. So I invite you now, as you're listening, to think about your organization or your department and what are the messages and also the actions that you hear and see about wellness, about your personal wellness or your self-care, right? And while you're thinking about the departmental or organizational messages and actions, right? Because words are great. They are very supportive, but they're even better when they're coupled with actions. So as you're thinking about the organization or departmental messages, I'd like for you to also to examine your personal beliefs about self-care, right? So do you tend to applaud people who overwork themselves? Oh, they're a rock star. They just get it done. Do you have this superhuman complex for yourself? I should be able to multitask and get all this done, even though it's packing a 70-hour work week into 40 hours. Do you feel like when you take care of yourself that it is selfish or it's self-indulgence? Do you feel like self-care is a privilege and it's all about a capitalistic society? And do you equate it to going to the gym or going to the spa? So do you think that self-care is an individual responsibility to manage your stress rather than a system needing to make systemic changes, right? So as as you've been thinking now for a minute, second or two, about your organization and your department, is your organizational culture one of selflessness? Meaning that, yeah, everybody's gotta go hard and we can't put ourselves first. So we need to be selfless. But what we notice is that that is disproportionately impacting some folk that work with us more than others. That we all have to sacrifice for the work that we're doing. Is that the message that you're getting? And so there's never a time when you're not having to sacrifice. Are you getting subtle or overt messaging about not being able to have open dialogues about how the impacts of all that's going on and the work affects you emotionally, politically, physically, or spiritually? Now, I'm sure that we've all heard about the minority tax. So is there anybody at all that's listening, thinking about all the added responsibilities that you might be taking on to support students or colleagues from your identity group, because there's really no one else around or nothing else in place that can be of support to them? And you have a desire to see other underrepresented folks be successful? Are you on a treadmill having a whole lot of non-promotion related tasks assigned to you? So all of those things, right, have to be considered and should be weighed as we think about our personal wellness and our self-care. Next slide, please. And we recognize that the decision for personal wellness or investing in self-care does not happen in a vacuum. So, our thoughts, Tatiana and I, as we were thinking about this presentation, we recognize that we have to acknowledge the adversity that we're facing, right? The racial trauma, right? The health crisis of COVID-19, as well as the oppression. So the first step is becoming aware by naming and acknowledging the past 14 months, and it might even date back earlier for folk. What have those months been like for you and those around you? Did you see yourself reflected in the racial trauma that was carried out again and again on camera? Was your family or the family of someone that you know impacted by the health crisis? Were you supporting students or colleagues? How has the systemic denial of racism and oppression impacted your well-being? Those are things that we think that you have to, start kind of thinking through and acknowledging in order to figure out exactly where your starting point is and exactly how you make the next step. So, as you can tell, we really leaned on Audre Lorde heavily, right? And we took away from her that self-care in the face of racism and the COVID pandemic. Self-care is resistance. And so, we go back to her quote because it was from a time when she was very involved in activism. Self-care is not self-indulgence. In fact, some research describes activist experiences of their effectiveness as connected to their level of self-care, right? So your personal wellness is resistance. So, for example, for people who are engaged in racial justice work, for Jessica and the team here that put this together, that are involved heavily in this work, social and economic and racial justice, you can't have fights about those things at work all day long and then go home and have fights on social media about them too, because you're not finding any kind of downtime, right? You're not allowing yourself a break. That was just an example, Jessica, just an example. But here are some practical steps that we thought would be important to just leave with you and to have you to think about. We think it's important when you think about personal wellness as resistance to limit re-traumatization. So if you're witnessing race-based violence towards people that share your identity with America's persisting denial, that's traumatizing. Try to limit rewatching the footage. Make a decision if you're having to support students who are experiencing these things or who are coming to you about these issues that their family members may be facing or that is triggering for them, how can you be strategic about that? And maybe if you're having to do that, how can you limit doing the emotional labor for colleagues who may not share the identity, but want to commiserate with you, especially if that commiseration means that you are tasked with making them feel better, right? Take care of your body. Enjoy invigorating showers or relaxing baths. Eat regular meals. Exercise to release extra adrenaline. Walk outside. Working on your health is resistance. Lean into your culture, right? What are the things that give you joy? What are the things that make you feel good, that are life-giving to you? Lean into that. The next one I really love, say it with your chest. If it means crying, if it means sobbing, if it means yelling, if it means singing, let it out. Find a space where you can do that. Because we know that anger and rage are normal responses to targeted violence, right? So we have to find ways, right? If we're going to institute this a regimen of personal wellness, we have to find ways even to use even our voice as resistance, right? Letting out whatever it is that you're experiencing. The next one, find and stay near to your freedom fighters, whether it's your ancestors, your spiritual guides, your cultural warriors, whether it's a comedian that you love, a pastor, a poet. Lean into the things that are life-giving for you. Do you have a favorite podcast? Is there artwork that you love to go see or that you like to pull up and look at? Are there blogs by activists that are life-giving to you? Who are those people that are committed to both health equity and anti-racism and the celebration of who you are? Find those people. You know, the next one I think is really important. Limit numbing with alcohol and drugs. Find other life-giving ways to self-soothe, right? Be with your people, listening to music, dancing, making a feel-good recipe. For me personally, Black joy is resistance. I love a good sitcom. I love some old school Black gospel music. I just love some of those things. They are life-giving to me. So in essence, find the people and the things that give you joy and create a community out of those things and share those things. So managers that are in the room that are listening to the webinar, I'm sure you were asking, well, what can I do? I'm so glad you asked that question. Because some studies have found that creating access to opportunities for professional development had a renewing effect on people. What minority taxes are you levying that you benefit from in your department? How can you then compensate people? What can you do to acknowledge that effort, right? The next thing is cultivate peaceful relationships and flexibility within your department. And finally, root out inequities and inequitable treatment and a culture of selflessness and create space for conversations about well-being. Tatiana?
Thank you, Andrea. I think that you have really begun to give a very broad overview, and I want to definitely supplement that with additional opportunities that people who are watching and listening can do as well. I think that one of the things that I don't know about you, but I'm very familiar with the mantra of the flight attendants when we were flying more frequently than now, and that is, you know, putting on our own oxygen mask first before beginning to help others. And I think that it's not that I think, I know that I've transitioned into another metaphor of filling my cup, of filling my cup and being self-full. One of the folks that I've been looking at is Iyanla Van Zant, and she once said that, we need to fill our cups and be self-full, and that we need to give others the overflow. And so I just want to offer that metaphor as well, just for people who are definitely wanting to do more work around self-care and healing. And you really touched on a lot of the broadness in terms of things that we can be doing. I want to just again link some of the things that you shared to those physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual outcomes. And that is, when we are really getting back to the basics, because I've had many conversations around people who are very, there's a lot of negative connotations around self-care, and that it's not, it's just not about manicures and pedicures. Although I do like manicures and pedicures, it's not all about that. And it really is us getting back to the basics. What the APA calls the big five, and that is making sure that we're getting adequate rest. And you want to talk about some folks and some great groups that I'm following. I'm following right now the NAP ministry, whose work is grounded in the framework around rest being resistance. And been loving what I've been reading, and loving the affirmations and inspirations through that. And again, healthy eating as a means and a ways, there are so many water bottles that have affirmations and encouragements, just so that we're giving our bodies what we need in order to restore and replenish, to help our brain functioning. You talked a lot about the physical activity. Physical activity also is a great way to give us an opportunity to release those emotions of anxiety and sadness. While relaxation also gives us an opportunity to calm our bodies and to calm our minds. And social connections, being with loved ones and being with our people, really helps us to lower symptoms of anxiety as well as depression. And research shows that it actually improves our immune systems as well. The Black Mental Health Wellness encouraged us to utilize some of these quick strategies. And so what I would encourage is, I echo some of the sentiments that Dr. Woods Giscombe shared during the first session around utilizing mindfulness and breath work, and also encouraging folks to name their emotions and express them. With a lot of clients, I have also been encouraging them to journal so that they can have a place and a space for getting out the thoughts in their mind. And some of my colleagues and I have consulted as well about some practices of writing and burning pages, tearing up pages. It's something really powerful and cathartic around that release there. And also, as the temperatures continue to warm in the spring and summer, really giving us opportunities to get outside, to spend some time outside to get a dose of vitamin D, as well as an opportunity for us to lower those anxieties. Some additional strategies include eating well and drinking well, of course, but visualization. You can do this through looking at established images or doing your own intentional work of really going to a place and seeing a place in your mind that helps you to feel content and calm, that also turns on and tunes into those five senses, such as what are you smelling, what are you hearing, what do you feel, just really looking into that as well. And I think another form of the arts that has been helpful, and I'll be very transparent in sharing, one of the things that has really grounded me and sustained me during this time has been painting. Really just painting through a virtual class online, or doing some freeform painting with my in the home as well. You mentioned as well listening to uplifting music, and I think that that one of the things that I've enjoyed as well is speaking with friends and loved ones who have been tapping into the celebrities on Instagram who have been providing DJing sessions as well as virtual verses to celebrate our artists and to really find ways for us to connect virtually through music. And it's been a wonderful way for us to use social media, which I think when it's overused, it can be traumatizing. For us to really use that to really find ways of of creating Black joy, creating hope, and connections as well. And then the other thing that I would encourage is remembering that a lot of the tensions and a lot of the emotions that we carry them in our bodies. And so I can't say enough how I am recognizing and reminding myself to release my shoulders, to allow my body to stretch in some way, shape, or form, to really allow some release in that area as well.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. As we wrap up, I invite you to hear Audre Lorde again. Lorde says that her secret of self-sustainability was identifying something your soul craves for nourishment. She said a different religion, a quiet spot, a dance class. She said, and then satisfy that. She says that that satisfaction does not have to be costly or difficult, only a need that is recognized, articulated, and answered. So we invite you to pick one of the quick fixes or to identify a change that you're willing to act on with your new or remembered awareness.
Yes. And also to remember too that, we are human. We are definitely humans, and we want to extend compassion for ourselves, for the works that we do, for the roles that we have, not only across the university and the campus, but also within our homes and within our families. And to really encourage you to create community. I definitely want to shine a light on the School of Social Work and saying how during this time we've had so many initiatives to create community through having virtual shared spaces to process and share the verdicts. When we also had times of coming together to share our reactions to some of the examples of the lives that have been lost over the past couple of years. And then in addition to that, we've come together to have spaces for parents to share the ways that they are navigating the pandemic with kids at home, to share strategies, as well as having a wellness task force that was supported in engaging us in different ways through Zumba and yoga, mindfulness, meditation, as well as just connecting in different ways, just to check on each other. And I encourage you and invite you to also check in with your colleagues, with your friends who have a level of relationship that you would invite to bring attention to, that you would invite to for them to bring attention to you about any concerns that they have about you, just to have someone that you're willing to listen to and hear when they're worried and concerned about you. And I think that one of the things that I want to also share is that, we are a resilient people, and resilience includes connections. It includes us moving towards goals collectively. It includes action, opportunities for us to pause and really and invite self-discovery, and also finding space to nurture hope and really truly taking care of ourselves. Lastly, we want to make sure that we share some resources with you. Dr. Woods Giscombe shared Psychology Today for folks who are really seeking some resources outside of the university. We wanted to share the Therapy for Black Girls resource, started by Dr. Joy Harden Bradford in Atlanta, Georgia. Has a resource of therapists in the area as well as the clinicians of color. And so we just want to always leave some resources, and we want to thank you so much for allowing us to share.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh,
go ahead, Jessica.
Antoinette, can we get back to my screen, please? Thank you. Um, Thank you both for your informative and thought-provoking and really timely presentation. When you were talking about self-care beliefs, I felt like you were ministering directly to me, and the reminder to fill your own cup first and then support others out of the overflow was a very timely and important message. So thank you all for that. Before we turn it over to the next presenters, I would like to remind the participants to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you might have. We will select questions from the Q&A to read aloud during that portion of our event. Next up, we have Dr. Ed Fisher and Samantha Liu joining us. Dr. Ed Fisher is a professor of health behavior and global director of Peers for Progress at the UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health. As a clinical psychologist and an expert in global peer support, Dr. Fisher shares his expertise with the UNC community via his participation in the Mental Health Task Force and through the development of the UNC Peer Support Corps. We also have joining us Samantha Liu. Samantha is the Associate Director of UNC Peer Support Corps. She is a double Tar Heel, having earned both her undergraduate and graduate degrees from UNC. She promotes and facilitates peer support and cross-campus collaboration as a means to influence the culture around mental health at her alma mater. Please welcome Dr. Ed Fisher and Samantha Liu.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you, Andrea and Tatiana, for a terrific, Tatiana, excuse me, for a terrific presentation. You know, many of us have heard many presentations on stress and stress management and trauma and resilience and well-being. And every time you hear a good one, you learn something new. And so it was really great to hear that presentation and to take away some good ideas, as Jessica mentioned, for making sure to fill your own cup or put on your own oxygen supply, or at least never forget them. And also I want to thank Jessica, Antoinette for the logistic support, Jessica for organizing all of this, and Alan for getting us off to a great start. Both Andrea and Tatiana talked about social connections. Andrea, when talking about wellness as resistance, talked about being with your own people, and Tatiana talked about social connections as being an important resource. And then in that last slide with 3 summary things, they talked about creating community right in the middle. And so that creating community and social connections is the area that Samantha Liu and I have been focusing on in developing peer support activities here at UNC and trying to promote those over the last year and a half or so, both amidst COVID, but also before that. And also, I should say, working with great encouragement and closeness with Alan and the Mental Health Task Force Implementation Group. So we want to talk to you a little bit about that, and don't have a lot of slides, but have a few just to sort of set up what we're doing here. So the Peer Support Corps is based in the School of Public Health. And in some respects, President Biden said it all in his inaugural address. You may remember these lines in the middle of it. Some days you need a hand, other days we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. I won't try to imitate his speaking style. But the idea that sometimes you need to help me and sometimes I need to help you, that mutuality that we'll return to is really core to what we're doing. And I think it's a really important perspective in life in general. as well as in dealing with trauma and stress that we're talking about today. We've been developing the peer support core, which Samantha directs, but we've been working very closely with the Carolina Peer Support Collaborative, which has really grown organically since about a year ago, as several people from different schools identified themselves as interested in developing peer support programs, and we began meeting initially with just about a dozen people, and now we have over 60 or 70 people in the group, representing about 35 units on campus, a number of schools, undergraduate student government, the employee forum, and a number of different groups on campus. And the peer support collaborative is really important because what we're doing is trying to help all the groups on campus enhance whatever peer support things they're doing. So we don't have a program, we don't have a particular model that we're pitching. Rather, there are lots and lots of peer support activities on campus, some of them explicitly labeled peer support, some of them with different kinds of labels, such as groups for people who share common concerns, such as problems with eating or concerns about the way obesity is dealt with in our society, and other issues. But what we're trying to do is promote peer support and help all the groups on campus enhance whatever they're doing in this area. And the collaborative is really important for this because the collaborative is the common meeting ground where the different groups can come together and meet with each other, talk, share ideas. Samantha and I do a lot more listening and encouraging than we do providing direct information. So in the peer support core, in addition to myself and Samantha, Pat Tang is a program manager of Peers for Progress who helps us a lot. Hannah Barker is a graduate assistant who's been working with us for the last year and a half. And Debbie Clark in the Provost's office has been our liaison with the Provost's office and with the rest of the campus community. So what I want to emphasize just for another minute is what I was just saying, as illustrated in the middle box here, that for staff, students, and faculty, what we're trying to promote are varied peer, mutual, and informal support programs and activities. And Samantha is going to talk a little bit more about support pods and affinity pods when I'm finished in a minute. But the emphasis, as I say, is providing lots of resources in the left-hand part of this slide, but the resources go toward promoting as many different types of peer support activities as we can. And our overall goal is not that everybody at UNC becomes an active member of a support group, but that everybody at UNC has somebody they can turn to. We want people at UNC not to feel isolated. We want folks that are on campus to feel that there's somebody here on campus or virtually on campus that they can turn to when they're feeling that there's something bothering them or that they need to talk about something. Of course, we hope most people have family and friends off campus as well, but it's important that people have a sense of belonging and connection within the university community. And apropos to today's theme, we really think that that variety of peer support programs and activities provides a way of, not the way, but a way of responding to racism and violence and COVID. People having resources in place, connections that they can turn to, or models of resources for supporting each other that they can develop and enhance within their units if they see a need for doing that. So we're trying to promote as much of a sort of basal level of peer support on campus, but also create models that people can turn to. And Samantha will talk a little bit more about this. I want to close by just being maybe a little bit more visionary about the overall organizational culture on campus. We have the quote there again from President Biden, but contrast that with what a graduating student mentioned in a meeting that I was in a couple of months ago. She said that her sense of the culture at UNC was, you are only worth what you produce. I found that really chilling. Others have said that there's a culture, they experience a culture on campus of always being perfect, always being on top of your game, never acknowledging vulnerability or, God forbid, failure at something. And we really see this, I think this goes back to what Alan was talking about in his experience from his medical training at the beginning of the session. This kind of culture of perfection is not good for anybody's mental health. The School of Nursing has been developing programs where everybody's linked to everybody else in some kind of a group to help create a culture of caring in the school. And more basically, we think that peer support really conveys mutuality. If you help me today and I help you tomorrow, that conveys two really important messages. One is that we both occasionally need some help. And the second is that we both are able to help other people, including each other. And so we really are trying to promote a sense of a culture of mutuality on campus that's not opposed to or antagonistic to an emphasis on achievement. Achievement is wonderful, but it's wonderful when we understand how the support of others as well as our own wits and effort contribute to our achievements. So we want to move toward a balance, a greater balance of a culture of mutuality with the culture of individual achievement on campus. And we think peer support can be an important part of that movement. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha and stop sharing my screen. And Samantha's going to talk a little bit more about some of the support groups that have been developing on campus in the last year.
Sure, thanks, Ed. So I just want to mention a few examples of some of what we've been calling support pods or affinity pods for folks. And in the spirit of this series focusing on racial trauma and healing, we do have, I'll highlight a couple of the groups who are based around racial identity. There is a group of Black students at Gillings who they have a support pod and they get together, but they actually have faculty and staff joining, which I think is really important to note when we think about trying to change culture and thinking about sustaining that change and drawing those connections. So breaking down some of the different roles. And that group has been meeting for, I want to say over a year now. And what's really interesting about that group, which has been really wonderful to hear for us, is that the facilitators of that group have been describing it as not just a reactionary space, not just one created in response to, a year ago, George Floyd's murder and every other act of violence that has happened since, but it's become a space from which students can jump forward and they can refer to as a space of support and connection. And really that that network of Black students, Black faculty, and Black staff within Gillings has been activated multiple times to make sure that students who may be in distress or who may be struggling, or someone notices something a little off about someone, they're able to activate that network and check in on each other. So that's been super heartening to hear from that group. Another group that I'll mention, again, within Gillings is the Asian American Pacific Islander pod. And this is a pod that was started by 2 faculty members who identify as Asian themselves, and invited all faculty, students, and staff within Gillings to join them. This was in direct response to the shootings in Atlanta in March. And that group has met since then several times. And it's really interesting because the group is beginning to formulate, what direction they'd like to go in. It started out with a lot of just listening and collective sharing of some of the experiences that people were having. And in that particular group, trying to bridge between folks who may have been 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th generation Asian American here, and as well as many of our international scholars at Gillings. And so bridging those kind of silos that we often find ourselves in, but who all are perceived to be of the same racial identity group within our society. So those are a couple of different examples. Of course, there are many, many other groups across campus, who have worked with us or who haven't worked with us, who are centered around racial identity and who meet together to create these spaces of community. I think that was something that was also mentioned by Tatiana and Andrea in their presentation. Was, I think it said, find your people, find your community. And I think that that's something that can be really important and powerful for a lot of people. And finding your people and your community doesn't necessarily mean just racial identity. There's a lot of intersections or different aspects of identity that someone could identify with. And so we've been trying to think about a lot of those things, which include sexual orientation or first generation folks or any kinds of different identities which historically have been marginalized or pushed to the side, and thinking about how people can connect and support each other throughout this process. And again, to really use that as a jumping off point for what Ed has described as a culture of neutrality, and trying to transform some of the very competitive culture that we find ourselves in at UNC, not only as students, but also as faculty and staff. Ed, anything else to mention there?
No, I think we should just make an invitation, Samantha, if you could put in the chat, anybody who wants to get involved with the collaborative or learn more about developing peer support activities on campus, whom should they email?
Absolutely. I'll put our emails and our webpage URL in the chat. Thanks for the reminder. Back to you, Jessica.
Thank you both for your leadership in promoting cross-campus collaboration around mental health and peer support. I especially appreciated Ed's calling out of the culture of perfection that exists at UNC and how detrimental that could be to the health of the entire community. And so it'd be interesting to hear later when we get in Q&A thoughts around like, how do we balance this culture of perfection when we're considering the university's identity as being first and premier and excellent. Like, you can be excellent and take care of yourself at the same time. So thank you both for that. Now we'll invite all of our presenters back so we can begin our Q&A segment. Again, I want to remind our participants to ask any questions that you might have using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and then we will address them as time allows. Okay, so we're just going to give a second for all of our wonderful speakers to come back onto the screen. And Samantha, you're also sharing out how to get involved, right? Perfect. Okay, so we have all of our presenters back. And the first question we have, and anyone can answer this, is how can we change beliefs around self-care when there may be a perception that the system or institution does not support self-care, but instead, it seems that the institution does not reward work-life balance in the same way that it rewards productivity.
So I can jump in here. One of the things that I think is that beginning to think about personal wellness and self-care as we presented it today as an act of resistance takes it back to you, right? It takes the emphasis and your focus off of the institutional pressures. It takes your focus off of the societal pressures, but it begins to help you to envision how your health and your personal wellness becomes this act of kind of, as the younger generation says, clapping back at all the pressures that are being exuded on you. The other thing that it does is that it flips this thing on its head, because as you begin to really embrace your personal wellness journey, you begin to have more efficacy and more ability to handle challenges that you're facing, whether that is, okay, I need to figure out what my next step is going to be, or going back to what Audre Lorde said, and that is, if you're finding the one thing that is giving you joy and that can sustain you through whatever period you're going through.
And Andrea, I like the idea of personal wellness as resistance, and you provided examples of ways to limit re-traumatization, whether that's shut off your social media or to avoid the news for a period of time. But how do you find a balance between taking care of yourself and running the risk of tuning out entirely?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Jessica. Thank you. So, I definitely, I'm one of those folk. The first time I saw that, I thought, oh, but I'm not going to stop watching. I need to know what's happening, right? I have sons, I have a daughter. I need to know what's happening so that I can be this vigilant mom that warns them. I need to know myself before I walk onto campus. So, what I've decided to do is I'll watch it one time. If it's calling to me, I might watch it again, but I monitor closely how many times I bring it back into my space. Right? That doesn't mean that I'm not fighting on behalf of it. That doesn't mean that I'm not doing the things that are also life-giving about whatever event occurred, but I'm not, I'm making sure that I limit that re-traumatization by, continuously watching the loop of what has just happened. So, yeah.
And I would add too that I think that there's an intentionality that we have about how we go about our day. I think that we have a choice about how much we engage and disengage. And it's about moderation. I think that when I think about how I start my day and how I end my day, I really want to start it in a way that's going to give me motivation and energy, music, eating well, moving your body around, and then making sure that that the news and these and the negative images and that media that can be traumatizing to us, that we're not seeing that before we go to bed, that we're doing some things to again pour back and replenish some joy, or that we're also taking the time that we need to let ourselves express and emote. I was sharing with some colleagues in some meetings earlier this week, just about how I feel as just as a Black woman, as a social worker, as a mother, as a sister, how I've had to compartmentalize a lot. And I think that on some days, that's what I need to do to get through it, because we're reading stories right now, and I'm not going to shed tears about. I'm really going to be present with this 4.5-year-old, and I'm going to experience this joy, and then I'm going to take some time to definitely be intentional about it, but also giving ourselves time to rest when we need to, and to really take care of ourselves.
Thank you for that.
I,
Yeah, go for it, Ed.
yeah, I mentioned that you always learn something new. The one that really stuck in my head was the idea of wellness and resilience as resistance. And I really like that. There's something political about eating a banana instead of a chocolate chip cookie. And, it's very small, but it's a step. And I really think that, I know for myself, when I go for a walk or floss my teeth, instead of having a drink or eating ice cream, I end up feeling a hell of a lot better. So I really appreciate that. I'd also make a pitch for reaching out to others, and, not to be advertising, but join the Carolina Peer Support Collaborative. Everybody's welcome. But also at a more local level, you all may think this is a little bit naive, but over the years, it's occurred to me within faculty groups and meetings and things, one person is one person. If I decide that, we really need to do X in the department, after 2 or 3 times that I've mentioned it, people start tuning me out and are tired of hearing about X. 2 people is a coalition. If 2 people in a department decide they're really going to work together and push X, they can get a lot done. So, if you're feeling beleaguered, if you're feeling that your department or your group or your unit or your office doesn't get it, find one ally, and the 2 of you can probably accomplish a whole lot more than you might have thought.
Thank you for that, Ed. I have a participant wrote that it's important to name that many of these qualities that we associate with UNC, whether we're talking about perfectionism or productivity or a reputation as an elite institution, are characteristics of what's described as a white supremacist and patriarchal culture. Could any of our panelists speak more about this and maybe provide some insight for how to shift the culture in a way that's more inclusive and healthy?
I'll start. Samantha's heard me talk a lot about this. I think the whole rhetoric of being number one is racist and anti-human. Just think about it. How many people can be number one? One. If we say that Matilda is number one, that means that people who do things different than Matilda can't be number one. So I think the whole notion of there's one norm, one dimension, one criterion, or one set of criteria, that we ought to be good, we ought to be effective, we ought to be achieving things that are worthwhile and not worry about our ranking. So I would think that it would be really great if the University of North Carolina said that they were no longer going to cooperate with the US News and World Report rankings, tell them to go jump in the lake, and say that we're going to define who we are and our objectives, and we're not going to worry about what other universities are doing. If they can learn from us, great. If we can learn from them, great. But we're not going to worry about who's number one and who's number two.
Thank you for that, Ed.
By the way, I have tenure, so I can get away with that.
Thanks for using your tenure to make the comments. I think that's also, what you've just done, Ed, is name these problems. And the person who asked this question that you read out loud, Jessica, they named that these hallmarks of UNC culture, which I mentioned is not just of students, but also faculty and staff, right? To put out papers and staff to, put in more than 40 hours or to do these things or respond to emails at night or, respond on your vacation. But those kinds of things, they're very pervasive. And until we do the first step of naming, the harm that some of these, ideas around perfectionism and always being on and always being perfect, have on ourselves and their root in white supremacy culture and being racist and classist, then, until we name those things, then it's going to be a challenge for us to address them. So just, again, like Ed said, getting allies, pushing for it, and trying to really, I think communications has a really great role in all of this, and working to name a lot of these issues, and trying to provide messaging that is really counter to some of that. I know we've gotten some of those messages, and I think y'all said earlier in your presentation, words mean a lot, but actions mean a lot too. We've got some of the words going. We need a little more words, but we could also get some actions going around that too.
Thank you for that. And this next question is somewhat related, and the person says that it addresses the strain that faculty and staff have been feeling over the last year, and that the messaging is to do more with less. Is the perception around campus this year, is that faculty and staff have had to pivot multiple times to address changing needs at rapid pace. But at the same time, the university is experiencing, budget cuts and hiring freezes and freezes on research spending, reduced staffed hours, and those types of things. So how can you use the techniques of self-care effectively when systemically there are so many competing issues at play?
I think that question and that point as well really leans into one of the things that we mentioned as well around some of this is there are systemic issues that are impacting folks, and are we saying just endure these challenges and just take a bubble bath? No, what needs to happen is it's a parallel work that needs to be done there. And what I say is that, what are ways that faculty and staff can come together to share their collective concerns and needs, and really generate some specific aims, specific actions that would be helpful to them being more successful. Because if before coming to UNC, I was working in a middle school, and we had many administrative meetings where I'm talking with the principal and I'm saying, if we don't feed the teachers, our kids are going to suffer. And so we have to make sure that we're taking care of each other. And people in positions of power and supervisory levels need to be able to hear the needs of their folks. And I agree that there's no self-care strategy around the systemic things that need to be changed. However, I still encourage that person that asked that question to do the things that I shared, but to also, when you come home and you take off your armor and your war clothes from fighting the fight and advocating and doing the things, the collective work together, be sure that you're taking care of yourself as well.
I will second that. And, I appreciate, Ed, your response earlier. And Tati, I think that this goes to that. There are people who are in positions of power who see this, right? And so I think that we acknowledge it, we name it, and people that see it and are able to do things or speak against it or bring it to attention and bring it to the light. I think that, in addition to folk who are not joining the peer networks and joining places of support, and remembering that, that personal wellness is not about them and what they're doing and the pressures and the freezing and the hiring, but it is about you forming a circle of resistance around yourself, of you taking action so that you enhance your efficacy, not so that you can meet increased deadlines or all of that, but so that you are mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually in a better place. And so I think that, like Tachi said, it is a parallel process that has to happen. And yeah, and I definitely appreciate Ed and Samantha. And Ed, I think you were going to speak to that as well.
Well, no, I was going to go into your bailiwick because my sense is that when you start talking about the key, it's always sort of an oversimplification, but very central to being good to yourself. Whether it's baths or whether it's walks or whether it's, a cleanse or whether it's meditating, those are all up for grabs. But what's central to all of it, to me, is comforting yourself, recognizing when you're hurting, when you need some help, and just accepting that and being kind to yourself, nurturing yourself. I think in our culture of number one and perfection, it's really hard even to admit to myself that I've been hurt and that I need a little bit of salve. And whether I watch the video of your presentation or whether I go for a walk or do something else, but recognizing that need and allowing myself that need seems to me to be a central point. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on about it. I meant to say, would you comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. I think you summed it up very nicely. It is about finding what you can put in your war chest as a resistance activity. What can you do that strengthens you, that makes you feel whole, that connects you to others? Maybe you can't discuss this with your colleagues at work, the things that you're going through, the things that you're feeling, but it's important that you discuss it and you find a group that you can lean into and discuss it, right? Maybe you can't attend the Zoom meet or discussion group after the latest thing that's happened, but who can you find for community, right? So it was always difficult for me personally after things transpired and we'd have Zoom meetings to discuss it because I wasn't ready to lay my soul bare there. But I did find a place and a space, a community that I could lean into and that I could talk to. So I think that is really, really important. I think that continuing to remind yourself, when you're naysaying, I don't feel like making a change. This is about resistance. And sometimes they're not things that we can do at the political level, at the administrative level, but our change, just this personal flipping on its head, what self-care is about, why we are investing in self-care. That is an act of resistance. And if enough of us do it, then we're going to confront the circumstances that we are up against much differently.
Okay. Our next question, we have a participant who shares that they are a member of multiple marginalized communities, and as such, it's been difficult to discuss the challenges of the past year, particularly when they get the response that, everyone is suffering right now, right? So, and that response tends to undermine their feelings that they're, feeling during the pandemic. What advice do you have for people to remain firm in their need to talk about the traumas that's going on while also recognizing, yes, everyone is indeed struggling?
I'll take a crack at that one and kind of refer back to what we were talking about earlier about these kind of hallmarks of white supremacy related culture and how, that division and trying to play the oppression Olympics is kind of part of that. And I would just like to note that I have experienced this myself and find a lot of solace in talking to friends of different communities and different identities than myself, and to talk about the fact that a lot of healing is rooted in solidarity, and a lot of our oppression is connected, as well as, a lot of our, striving for freedom will also be connected. So I would just urge you to just keep talking and just keep putting it out there, because it shouldn't be who's struggling the most. And yes, everybody is struggling, but that struggle is all connected. So look for those kinds of connection points.
And Samantha, for any attendee who has not heard of the Oppression Olympics, do you care to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. When I say Oppression Olympics, I mean just this, folks who are saying, oh, I'm oppressed in this way, and then someone else responding, oh, but the oppression I experience is worse, and then someone else chiming in and saying, oh, but mine is worse. So therefore, you're kind of creating this hierarchy of like, who's the most oppressed, and I think that can happen, and of course, real time and in conversation, but also I think that's something that's internalized. As an Asian American woman myself, and experiencing race in America as a Black-white binary, there's a lot of reflection and a lot of unlearning to realize that, like, yes, the struggles of like my racial identity group matter as well, and that can be, we can push forward, and just because my group is not struggling as much as someone else, that doesn't mean that we can't advocate together for the things that we both that will advance both of us. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
That's perfect. We have a couple participants who are asking questions about understanding the boundaries between self-care and laziness, and how to maybe do a better job of tuning into themselves to know when they need to take a step back and care for self, but also when is it time to re-engage in activities.
I oftentimes have these conversations with students during the year, and there is, I think, I'm going to say again how this is all tying into this culture of perfection, and all of this, to where we have to figure out when is it okay to take care of ourselves. And what I say to that is, self-care, we offered a lot of, we talked about a lot of different ways to take care of yourself. But then I've had conversations with students where they'll say, well, I feel very overwhelmed by all the things that you said. And it's to offer you an array of things to choose from, not to put you in this race of how many can I check off to say that I've done, to say that I am doing well or getting a high grade in self-care. But it's more so you being very conscious and in tune with your body. And that is, self-care should not be something that is, I'm gonna go about my day and then I'm gonna do self-care. What are ways that you can really integrate self-care as a part of your lifestyle and as a part of who you are, that is an everyday thing, and that's not viewed as something that's not viewed as laziness. You're pouring into yourself to help you to be the best human that you can be, or to do whatever it is that you're aspiring to do well. And I think that the saying around everything in moderation is something, when you're painting and and you're drinking your water and you're yogaing and you're not doing the things that you need to do, and the level of self-care is in excess to the point where you're not getting the things that you need to get done, then I think that that's some time to take stock. But you really need to listen. I would encourage you to really be in tune with your body. What is your body saying when you're quieting yourself and stilling yourself? What is your body saying that you need? And for you to not look to other people to do that. You know yourself. You are the master of yourself. So definitely, again, let that decision rest with you.
Thank you. And this is our last question, and it's come from a student who wants to know how to practice self-care when you are, suffering from vicarious trauma, but also experiencing extreme financial instability right now. So how do you take care of yourself when financial instability makes it difficult to focus on anything else?
So, I think, finding someone that you can talk to is very important. whether it is, joining a peer group, or, you're talking to someone in your particular department or administration about, or faculty that you trust about what's going on with you. I think it might mean that, you are tapping into CAPS on campus if you are able to do that. But finding someone, a place that you can trust, and you can kind of lay out all the different pieces that you have going on, whether it's sliding scale counselors, whatever it is, or maybe there is a pro bono, right, support group or counselor, whatever you need to do, but do that part of homework so you can have a space that you can lay out and you can talk about and you can think about, the pressures that you're experiencing, whether it's related to the work that you're doing or related to the financial burden that you're up under. I say, that is a great second step, because you've already met the first step. You're kind of aware that this is happening to me, and this is, I think, contributing to all that I'm feeling. Don't do it alone. Get connected.
I second that. And for the person who asked that question, if you're a UNC student, I do recommend that you connect to a case manager in the Dean of Students office. That is a very small and mighty team, and they do amazing work. And so we can't ask you to be self-actualized and be your best as a student if you have some unmet basic needs. So please, I urge you to connect with that team of people.
You can also connect with me, and I can help you navigate the system.
Thank you for that, Alan.
Thank you.
So that concludes our question and answer portion of our event. Before we wrap up, I wanted to share with you all a couple of quick announcements. Okay, and let me get my share screen going. There we go. I'm technology challenged. So first is I'm excited to announce that we are finally ready to recruit from our very caring UNC faculty and staff. Folks who might be interested in serving as resilience coaches for the Carolina Collaborative for Resilience that we hope to launch by fall. If you are interested, the link to our page and the application is there on the screen. You can also email me at resilience@unc.edu to answer any questions that you might have about that process. Okay. Our final discussion in our Culture of Care series, it will be held on Tuesday, May 25th. Same time, same place on Zoom, right? It's Care in the Midst of Chaos. We will have Susie Baker from the Dean of Students office that I just mentioned, who will be joining us, along with Dr. Charlotte Blumel from Student Wellness. There's still time to register, so if you've not had the chance to do so, I urge you to do that. Also, if you check our Culture of Care webpage, we have videos from last week's event posted there, and we will also post the video of tonight's event there as well. So we'll have a place to store all of the events and resources that come up throughout the course of these conversations. Okay. Finally, I want to thank all of our panelists who are here with us tonight: Tatiana Williams, Andrea Murray-Lickman, Dr. Fisher, and Samantha Liu. Thank you all. And Alan also, thank you all for sharing your expertise with our campus and community. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to learn and share from each other and think about how we can build our community in a way that we all become stronger and more resilient and healthy, happy, and whole together. So thank you all for, taking the time to lend your expertise to us all. And I also want to thank all of the sponsors who made this event possible: the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Antoinette for being our behind the scenes technical person, Chloe for working with me to get speakers online, the Office of Student Affairs for lending us Alan for the evening, and the UNC Center for Faculty Excellence. Okay. So that concludes our event for tonight. We hope to see you all on May 25th. Thank you, and you enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.
That was great, folks. It,
Yes, awesome.
and Andrea and Tatiana, really great to meet you both.
Likewise.
Oh, it was great to be with you.